Everything is personal right here. Everything is personal right here.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Everything is Personal. And today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. Dolores Fazzino. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Well, thanks so much, Len, for having me. And as you could tell, I'm on the road right now. I'm actually on a little spiritual sojourn for myself. I'm in Spearfish, South Dakota. And so I'm going to go on a little, I want to say vision quest, if you want to call it that.
Tell me a little bit about that. Like, what does that entail?
Well, I'm going out into the wilderness, not overnight or anything, but just to really bond with the earth because this area of the country is so laden with so much history with Native Americans. And of course, you have the Lakota Nation, and I'm a very I love the white buffalo calf woman. She's like one of my spirit guides. I actually call her my fairy godmother, and she hails from this part of the world. And with all the wonderful things that I've received from her throughout the last several years, I really felt that I wanted to come to her homeland to honor her and pay homage and reverence for her in my own
Interesting.
special way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's super neat. I really want to get deeper into this stuff. I just kind of a high level question, like
Yeah.
how do you decide that your mission is to heal people? Like, did you get a download one day, or is that something you said, I'm going to do this in my life? And
Well, Lynn, that's a real interesting question because I know everybody has their stories, and mine is pretty unique to me because as I was raised, I'm a product of the 1960s. So I was raised in the 60s where everybody was, you know, the facade was everything was perfect and the white picket fences and the houses, but inside the houses it was like, anything but.
yeah,
And it was like that illusion that we were supposed to perceive. So for me, I ended up getting very interested in music at a very young age. And in fact, I was a concert clarinetist until my teenage years when I had that pivotal moment that I knew it was my mission to go into healthcare. And it centered around a miraculous healing of my father with a long-term chronic health condition that he had by some alternative modality. So, for me, it was one of those things that I just knew in that moment that this was my mission. And, I just want to circle back to the whole thing. Why music? In our household, we weren't allowed to feel. When you have a very sensitive person like myself, I was born an empath, intuitive, and highly sensitive person. My mother's MO was not to feel at all. In fact, she would tell us to ignore it, it'll go away. And when you say that to somebody who's an empath, intuitive, and a highly sensitive person, it's not when you ignore it, it kind of grows bigger. So I would share with her, I said, it's not going away, it's getting bigger. So for me, in order to survive my childhood, I needed a methodology or a creative outlet to um, explore my emotions, but also to pour my emotions into. So I really excelled at playing the clarinet and was ready to go and apply to music schools my junior year of high school. And then my father, who had been sick for about 10 years, and I'll backtrack a little bit with that. My dad in the 1960s had back surgery and he acquired a hospital infection. So what that was during the 1960s was like a death sentence because it predates the whole time, from the mid 70s on where we had the medications and the technology and also the equipment to measure things that we did not have a decade before. So my dad had that episode happen in 1966. He was really, really sick. He was on his deathbed. He survived that. And then 4 years later, almost on a yearly basis, from 1970 to 1975, he would develop the same sequela of health issues every time, and it seemed to correlate when his immune system got compromised. So it was like a wild ride, my childhood, because every time that would happen, we didn't know if dad was going to make it out of the hospital alive or not. And so having that happen 4 times, we bring ourselves up to 1975. Now, what was different in 1975 was the CAT scanner had just come on to the medical technology world, and they were able to, put people underneath that scanner and determine where things were happening. It gave them a better idea of where to look for things. And what they found was that when my dad had his previous back surgery, at that point, it was 10 years prior, this is where his chronic infections um, kept reoccurring from that, or they were being seeded from that area. And every time his immune system got compromised, it would activate and just start this whole sequela. So the surgeons at that time, their solution for this was to have a spinal fusion, which in 1975 was in its early stages of development, which came with high risk, meaning that you could die, you could be paralyzed, or maybe you get better, and maybe you wouldn't. My mom wasn't buying any of that. She was at her wits' end because after dealing with 10 years of that and having 10 kids, or not 10 kids, 10 years of that and 4 kids, it was really a challenge for her. And I really have a lot of empathy for her because of what she had to go through, and she did the best she could. So she was looking in all places for anything that would spark some hope and maybe something different, because she felt that Western medicine had failed her. And so she came across an article, and you remember this is 1975. It's not 1990 where we have computer and Google search and Google MD. We had the National Enquirer. And and this is where people would get their information. Um, so my mom came across an article that was being written and featured by the National Enquirer of this man from Carroll, Michigan. He was a reverend, and he had the gift of laying on of hands. And at that time, he was being featured because he had assisted his brother in healing from leukemia. So you have to understand, in 1975, this was on the cusp of quackery, or considered quackery, but this man had been doing this work for over 25 years. So he had been doing it since the 1950s. My mom was all over this like butter on bread. My dad, not so much. And in fact, they were in the hospital having this discussion, and my father said, not unless the surgeon agrees to this. So my mom goes out to the nurse's station, and the surgeon just happened to be there, and announced to the surgeon that I'm thinking about having a spiritual healer come in to assist in my husband's health and wellness. Would that be okay? Surgeon's writing, didn't miss a beat, looked up, said, sure, that would be fine. So my mom said that was the blessing. She went back, shared that information with my father. My father said yes. 10 minutes didn't go by. My mom returned back to that same nurse's station, same surgeon sitting there, and announced to the surgeon, my husband agreed to have the spiritual healer come in to assist with his condition. The surgeon looked up at her and said, what are you talking about? I never agreed to that. So my mom didn't share that piece of the information with my father. And a month later, we were at our home in Connecticut. That's where I grew up, with my 3 siblings and my grandmothers on both sides, and my parents and the minister. And my mom flew him in from Carroll, Michigan. And what I really found really neat about this guy was he had this beautiful energy, and it was just this calmness. And I just knew that everything was going to be okay in his presence. And he noticed that my dad had one leg that was shorter than the other. Not sure how he knew this, because my dad does have one leg shorter than the other, but he was barefoot and he didn't have his shoes, which he usually has a lift in for that. They were nowhere in sight. So I don't know how this man knew this, but he knew it. And he asked my father to put both his feet up, and you could tell when both feet were up, there was a 1-inch gap with the longer one. And he said to my dad, lower your feet. And then he started praying over my father, and he touched his belly, which is the solar plexus, and the top of his head, which is like your crown chakra, and said some prayers. And then after about 2 minutes, he instructed my father to lift both his legs, and they were both the same length. So my dad started bawling like a baby, like I've never ever seen him ever in my lifetime up to that point. Because remember, he was the skeptic. He needed to see something visual evidence that something's happening. Prayers over my father. I, for me, in that moment, knew that my life path was supposed to go into healthcare because I was supposed to bridge the physical with the spiritual and the invisible with the visible. And so more prayers were said over my father. He was instructed to rest. He slept for over 24 hours, which, when massive energy work is done for people, it's not an unusual thing that you sleep for that length of time or even more, because your body's processing what's the changes that are happening energetically around you and within you as well. My dad returned back to the CAT scanner a month later. There was no evidence of his infection. He never had to have the surgery. He never had to revisit that problem. And he passed away about 11 years ago at the age of 80. So, yes, that's a pivotal moment
Yeah,
that
I mean,
when you know.
yeah, it's an incredible story. There's so much to unpack here, but I'm going to go back to something you said, which resonated with me. Maybe I didn't realize this until in myself until you said that. The whole thing with music, I find that fascinating because, in my household, emotion was also seen as weakness, and maybe it's the years that my parents are older when they were probably raised the same way. uh
Yeah.
so, and I only found this out in a session with a psychologist. My parents came in. My dad was like, and Len never cried, and he was so proud of that. But I'm fascinated because I never thought about it this way.
Yeah.
Maybe because I wasn't allowed, it was discouraged to display emotion. Not maybe that was my connection to music also. It wasn't like I was playing instruments where I did dabble in different things, but I had this obsession with music constantly. Listening to
Mm,
music because I would go to sleep. Like I had like a little radio and I record, make tapes, and kind of like this is my whole thing. And I think that really connected me and with my passion for music since I was a kid, because that was my emotional side that was suppressed, but I could relate to it in music in some way. So you just sort of, I've never thought about it this way until you kind of told your story. So I
yeah.
definitely can
Oh,
empathize
that's
with that.
cool. That's cool. I mean, it's a nice little epiphany to find things out like that. It's like I'm always delighted and humbled on a day basis, because it's just like, I'm always learning something new and about myself and just about, everything, which makes it exciting.
What what is the connection between like spiritual and physical healing based on your
Ah,
opinion and
you
thoughts?
know, I believe that, and I'm going to speak from Western medicine because that's where I kind of dabble in and I bridge the two together. I feel that in healthcare, for the longest time, we only looked at the body. And in fact, we dissected it even further, that we looked at segments of the body, like they were separate and they never intertwined together, right? Because we know that, okay, your circulatory system, that goes to every place in your body, right? Your nervous system goes to every place in your body. When you try to separate like your hormones, that's an interesting thing too, because the hormones, your pituitary, your hypothalamus, your thyroid, your parathyroid, your adrenals, and your sexual hormones, they are all interconnected. It's like a homeostasis type of mechanism, where if one's off, the other's going to compensate for what's off. When you separate it, okay, you have a thyroid, we only look at the thyroid. Well, you know what? Guess what? Some people who have thyroid problems, they mimic problems with female hormone deficiencies. Okay, you could get hot flashes by having an underactive thyroid. So instead of just looking at the whole picture and figuring out what's going on, it's time to blend it all together. Okay. It's not a linear progression or in separate boxes. The human body is a matrix, not only just the physical, but we are looking at adding on to that the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, even the ancestral, if you want to call it epigenetics as well,
Mhm.
or dimensional stuff. It's all happening in ways we have no way to decipher exactly why. But I always find it fascinating because of that whole concept. So I'm finding that the spiritual aspect of things, I would say in the last 20, 25 years, is starting to make some headway and connecting that because it is, I want to say it's almost the secret sauce that makes us whole and complete. And go ahead.
No, I was just saying that functional medical profession. So I agree with you on this whole notion of Western medicine, but there are, combinations of people who look at Eastern and
Yes.
Western medicine, and they're seeing what the root cause. I just had I have a genetics company. I just had a call with somebody previously, and they were talking about, pain, like joint pain. And I was saying, well, it could be stress related. Well, how? Well, cortisol levels, increasing. I don't want to go into in
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
detail, but I'm like, just because your knee hurts, it doesn't mean that let's give a shot in your knee to address the pain in your knee. Let's go back and figure out what is the root cause, and that cause can be like you were just saying, a release of, it's all a balance, right? So
Absolutely.
homeostasis, you
Yeah.
have a release of cortisol, it stays in your bloodstream longer, you have overactive immune response, you have some pain in your joints, and it happens to be your knee. Okay, well, it doesn't mean you have to numb the pain and get rid of it. Let's go back. So we are starting to see that a little bit of the combination of
Yeah.
that, functional, integrative type of medicine. But I haven't heard medical professionals per se speaking about the spiritual part of it, like the that part of the healing that you're talking about. And I wonder, when did you discover, first of all, in yourself that you had these intuitive qualities and this ability, to use energy to heal? Was that the moment of inspiration when you saw that, and then you said, "Let me see if that's something that I have in me as well"?
No, I want to, I'd say it goes back to my early childhood because
Okay.
I was just curious about everything and just very intuitive. I knew things, I had like experiences like they were deja vu stuff, like when I was 4 and 5, and it's like I swear I'd done it before, but there's no way possible that I did in this lifetime. So, having glimpses of that, and I was also very blessed too because my grandparents or my grandmothers, my mom's mom in particular, she was actually my first spiritual teacher because her and I would talk spiritual stuff all the time. I used to ask her about, what's heaven like, and those type of questions.
Mhm.
And she was very awake and evolved and ahead of her time. So she was born in the 1900s, and like I said, she probably would have fared very well if she was born now because she, knew things, and she just had that sixth sense and that intuitiveness also. Um, so I feel that, and I totally agree with you with the whole naturopathic and the integrative stuff. It's good that they're starting to do this. There's more to come with that, I know. This is just the beginnings of it. And, once we start really dialing it in, because things are accelerating so quickly right now, it's just like we've been like this, and all of a sudden we're like this. The trajectory is going up in the air like this, of everything's happening rapid fire and quickly. So 5 years is going to seem like a year, in a snap of a finger. Look at this year. We're already 6 months out, and it's just like it's
Yeah, it's
year's half
fine.
over. I'm
It's
like,
fine. And I agree with you on that. And the introduction of machine learning and AI is going to help us to accelerate. But I still feel that big pharma has so much control over the way healthcare is practiced, at least in the United
yes,
States. And
yes,
how can they possibly, like, insurance isn't going to cover, spiritual healing. So how is it going to work for people that, don't have the means? If they're,
yeah.
you have to have insurance. That's it. And insurance has an ICD-10 code associated with it. If there's a code, then yeah. But
I
if
know.
there's, how is that going to work?
And I totally agree with you. And I'm probably going to get banned off your site for what I'm going to just say because, but it's just like I have nothing to hide. It's just like, okay, I got to back up. First of all, our innate healing ability, each one of us has that ability to heal ourselves. It's our sovereign right to do that. The problem is that many people, either consciously or unconsciously, have given that power and right away to something outside of themselves. Okay. Be it the medications, the doctors. Our innate healing ability relies on us listening to ourselves, having a relationship with ourselves, and being in your body so you could experience your emotions, and that is your barometer. And when you're in your body and you're feeling your emotions and you're able to come to a still point, you're in the present moment. When you are in the present moment, you are able to connect with your intuition, if you want to call it, God spark, inspiration. It's that little voice that tells you things that you know that the times that you didn't listen, you live to regret it. That voice I'm talking about. You have to be in your body and be still to hear that. So, what I'm going to say is going to be something that a lot of people aren't going to like, but I practice what I preach, and I'm in healthcare. If something feels like a hell no to me, I don't do it. Okay, because my intuition is screaming at me and I have a relationship with my higher aspects of myself, and I allow them to give me the information I need that is the correct thing for myself, not my neighbor, not my significant other, not my family, but for me. Okay, and I feel what has happened is that people have given that sovereign right out to somebody else since they see the white coat. Yes, dear, you have all the answers. Newsflash, we don't have all the answers.
Yeah, we don't question the healthcare. You're so, and this is why I've had so many interactions with doctors
Yeah,
that, they're, they may not want to hear that. It depends on the doctor,
yeah,
it's themselves. So I'm going to rewind back
yeah,
because you mentioned your childhood. You grew up in Connecticut. You talked about your parents and you had siblings as
yeah,
well. You have siblings and you were pursuing music,
right.
uh, but you took a fork in the road and went into traditional medicine. And you were saying that you had this feeling that you were meant for healing. Like you already
Yeah.
had this inside. So was that a decision that this is the only path for me? I have to go traditional medicine. How did you decide that you were going to pursue that?
That's an interesting thing because I don't think there was a lot of options in the 70s for a lot of different things. It was either going become a doctor, or a nurse, and I chose the nurse path. And even at that time, there was many different pathways within nursing. You could go to a diploma program that was a hospital type of thing, 3-year diploma program, or you could go and get your associate's degree, 2 years, or your 4-year degree, a bachelor. So I opted, I had a family friend who was a nurse, and she said, Dolores, go for the 4-year thing. So she guided me towards that. And I'm glad I did
Mhm.
because that kind of really set it paved the road for me for what I was doing after that and stuff like that. So, but yeah, as far as like naturopathic doctors or holistic health stuff, that really didn't come about until the 1990s. So we were like 20 years prior to that. It may have been there, but it was so deep rooted within, it was invisible in my space. And I feel that I went the appropriate pathway for me because I think I needed, and I feel like I needed to get that experience to see what it was really like, because I knew truths and how best I could work with bridging the two together. So, there's never a mistake. It's like you're strategically placed where you need to be to get the information that you need. So,
I mean, so beautifully said, but you're still in the system.
yes.
Obviously, learning about the body and all these different things, anatomy, physiology, all that is important to the work that you're doing. But you're stuck in the system, and all the things that you're talking about now is what you had to actually do because that's the only way.
Yeah.
How did you sort of rise from that as a phoenix, I guess?
Oh, it's kind of interesting. I think I've always been a rebel my whole entire life. And, if people would say, well, you can't do that, and I would say to them, watch me. And so, I had no problems being the odd duck out because yeah, it was like lonely at the top. But when you know what you know, sometimes the people aren't ready to hear that.
Yeah.
Okay. And to be in healthcare for over 45 years and witnessing the transition that I've witnessed over the 45 years in the openness of looking at alternative modalities and even embracing the spiritual component with that, which is so essential to me. That's your secret sauce. That's the glue that keeps everything together, you know?
Yeah, and I'm really grateful for you doing a session with me because I
Mhm.
have my own, perspective of this. But for the people that, you didn't have a chance to actually have this a session with, and I hope that everybody who's listening does engage and do this because I found it an extremely healing process for me in many different ways. And I wish I could do this on a daily basis, but let people know what isn't intuitive. What does it entail? Intuitive
Sure.
healing, like
So, I am very dialed in. Okay. If energy was a language, I would be fluent in it. Okay. I'm the type of person that I am very kinesthetic and I feel when somebody starts talking, I see the energy of their thoughts, whether or not, what they kind of say to themselves, what they believe about themselves, their beliefs, and also their emotions, whether or not there's things that are, they're stuck in certain places with their emotions. Because believe it or not, your emotions, when you don't experience them, they get locked in different parts of your body. Because if you have pains in your body, I would put money on the fact that there's probably a locked up emotion that either was partially experienced, never experienced, ignored, or put on the shelf later to deal with and you never got to deal with. So it's like sometimes grieving is one of those big things too that shows up in your physical body when you've gone through major losses and you haven't properly grieved or allow yourself to grieve. So it's like looking at those different aspects because those are all aspects of who we are. Let me back up a little bit to see if I could explain it better. Okay, so Len, you and I are looking at each other and we're in these rooms. Everything is energy, okay? We are a denser version of energy. The pictures behind you, the shade behind me, the computer, headphones, it's just a denser demonstration of energy. We could see this. And if you were to look under a microscope, a high power, it's vibrating. Okay. Everything's moving. It's energy. So the things that we can't see, or maybe some of us can, are thoughts, radio waves, or maybe emotions, another radio wave, our connectedness to ourself, another radio wave. the things that we say to ourselves in the quiet of our mind, another radio wave. These are all energy, but things that we can't see. Now, I'm going to give people an example. How often have we thought about somebody we haven't heard from in God knows how long? They live thousands of miles away. You think about them, and the next day they pick up the phone and they call you. This is how quickly energy transfers and it communicates. So just because we can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So when you take all of that energy into consideration, a lot of times this is what we can't see. So it's like underneath the iceberg. The iceberg is the physical stuff that we can see, like Len and I talking to each other in our office spaces. That's physical at top of the iceberg. What's below is like what you're thinking, what you're believing, how you deal with things, and whether or not you're connected to yourself, or whether or not you spend a lot of time in your body or out in the ethers, you're disconnected. So underneath there, and believe it or not, what's below the surface is running the show. Okay, so when you have misalignments or things are out of kilter there, this is starting to carry over into your physical body. So when you have aches and pains, it's almost like a barometer saying, pay attention, you need to look at something deeper. Okay, so when I work with somebody, I have access to all of those and I could guide them to what needs to help them with what is currently going on with them. And like I was sharing, everything is not a linear progression. Things are interconnected in ways we have no idea. Okay. And when you're able to unravel it, for those of us who lived in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, Purina dog chow come to mind. You know, the bag with the little tag that if you pulled it in the right direction, it just opened nicely. If you pulled it in the wrong direction, it was like riding through life with the emergency brake on, right?
Yeah.
So this is what happens when you're able to align things, you're pulling the string and it's just unraveling, and all that knotted stuff is just coming out, and you're able to have a different experience of who you are and actually heal things right here, right now, in this moment.
I'm curious about, I definitely want to unpack that a little bit more, just so people
Sure.
can understand what is the practical use and how does it engage them. Because I can talk about my own personal experience too, but you just brought something up that I find interesting because still traditional healthcare, the Western kind of healthcare. Well, you do clinical trials, right? And there's already a place for placebo.
Yeah.
Well, why is there no place for beliefs? Like if you said it brilliantly several times. Like if I believe I am sick, I am going to perpetuate that. And we went through this in the pandemic already. I've talked to so many people because what I was trying to do during the pandemic is I had COVID twice. I was taking my supplements and I was recording for people so they're not fearful. My experience, exactly what was going on. Yes, I have a headache. Yes, my nose stuff. Yes, I cannot smell. But people were creating these notions, and you know what? They were feeling worse.
Of
And there
course.
is a huge correlation to that. So I was just wondering, in clinical trials, because we're Western medicine focused, why isn't there a space to actually talk to people before and have them at least have some sort of spiritual guidance, or at least like shift their belief, like, your surgery is going to be, I can only see it. Surgery is going to be successful. You're going to be walking. You're going to, like, why is that part of the process? It makes no sense.
Y'all, I could give you some insight because I'm going to share a story from my personal world, because I'm my primary care doctor's worst nightmare. Okay. So, okay. I find that a lot of healthcare providers, a patient might have what it looks like on paper with the labs and everything. They don't look at the patient sometimes, but they look at the labs and they say, oh my God, you got X, Y, and Z going on. You're going to have a heart attack or whatever. So they get all excited about this. They're projecting their angst onto the person.
Mm.
Okay. And what happens is the unconscious stance. The person starts wigging out, even though they don't feel that they're sick, and they start creating that because it's being projected onto them and they're taking it on as their truth, and they do that. So, long story short, I have, for me, Italian heritage, lipid panels off the charts. Been that way my whole entire life. In fact, my dad's side of the family's been like that. They live till their 80s and 90s, even 100. Okay. Go into the primary care doctors. And of course, blood pressure is like 100 over 60, heart rate in the 60s, no other family history of, whatever. And she's like, "You're a setup to have a stroke." She's like getting all excited. And I was like, "No, I'm not." And she's over there, "Well, yes, you are. You need to have a stress test." I said, "No, I'm not. And no, I don't." "Well, you need to be put on statins." I said, "Been there, done that 10 years ago for 2 years, did absolutely nothing. Not going back on it because I don't know what the long-term effects are. And I'm not willing to be the guinea pig to find out. And I'm not into paying big pharma for something I don't need." End of story. And plus, at that time, I also had Doppler studies that I paid on the side for, and there was no evidence of plaque in my arteries.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. I mean, I had this conversation with my parents all the time, and
Yeah.
my dad, my mom also, but my dad is a big believer in the doctor knows better. Never argues, never asks any
Yeah.
questions, doesn't know why. And he's a really
Yeah.
smart person and questions everything else in life, but not
Yeah.
that. I said, what was the endocrinologist? Change of medication. I said, but why? I don't know. I don't ask. Well, they said,
Yeah.
do this, do
That's
that kind of
and
thing.
Len, that's a classic example of people giving their power away to something else.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting, and I feel that for some people, they just it's an automatic thing.
Yeah.
It's just like and maybe it's because they're not aware, or maybe they think that it's almost as if they don't have trust and belief in themselves.
It is that, and it's also a systematic brainwashing of people's expertise because I've had people told me this before as an example. I go to the auto mechanic. I know
Mhm.
nothing about cars. This person's an expert. I trust this person that they will do right for my car. But how many people ever have an issue with the auto mechanic? Oh, and it's a female, doesn't know anything about cars, most likely. Let me see if I can jack the price up a little
Oh
bit
yeah.
more. And it happens all the time. So trusting somebody just because they have an expertise takes away from you, like
Mhm.
have that
Yeah.
conversation of the why. And I think that's a missing element.
Yeah, and it's just like ask more questions. I remember when I was working on my doctorate at Case Western Reserve University, my one of my professors, we went around the room and introduced ourselves, and she wanted to know our why, which was really interesting. And something about asking for more information before making a decision. I mean, I learned so much from her from that, and it's allowed me to go deeper into not trusting the first thing I hear, but to ask more questions and getting more research and more information. Key.
Yeah.
For me, what was the deal sealer was back in the early 80s. Back in the early 80s, I was one of those new nurses, and I was working in the ICU, and we had the pandemic back then, the AIDS and the HIV pandemic.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me tell you what that was like working in the MICU, the intensive care unit, where we were taking care of those patients. The protocol changed daily. Prior to that, I thought Western medicine had all the answers until that happened. I was like, oh my God, nobody knows what the hell's going on. Pretty much that from that point on, the last 40 years, I've had that reference point that they don't have a clue. They don't,
Yeah, they
because
just
there's a
try.
reason why they call it a license to practice.
They're practicing. Yeah, I don't I don't practice on me.
Exactly. But
Uh,
under the false auspices of evidence-based medicine too.
right. But I mean, if you're starting with do no harm, at the very least, I'm making an assumption. At the very least, the things that you're practicing, you're gonna catch if it's actually causing something else. I'm assuming that that's the mindset of a healthcare professional when they do, when they take their oath as well.
I would hope so. I know for me, when we took oaths too as nurses,
Right.
that I wanted to treat every patient as if they were my own personal family member, because I wouldn't expect anything less of my colleagues doing that for my parents if they lived in another part of the world.
Dolores, you talked about DNA, and since I know a little bit about that, but you talked about this ancestral lineage kind
Mhm.
of thing. Maybe you can go into a little bit more of how that energetically, where that stays, and how that manifests itself. I'm
Sure.
curious.
It's a very interesting concept. And um, what we have to understand is that we're all energy, okay? Everything is energy. You remember that bottom line concept.
Mhm.
When we are conceived, when the sperm and the egg come together, crash, and we're like an organism, we become an energetic being. Okay. So what that means is that we are taking on what's happening in our environment. And maybe you're in your mom's womb, and maybe mom's not having a good time in life right now, and you're taking on her angst or whatever, even though it's not yours, but energetically you're taking it on an unconscious level, and it's influencing you and kind of setting you up for what's going to happen down the road. So along with that, it's like what's happening in your family of origin, both your parents' side and your dad's and your mother and father's side,
Mhm.
and the great grandparents and great all that comes into play. So by the time you're born, a lot of people, especially people like myself, who's an empath, intuitive, and highly sensitive person, what was happening to me, I would take on everybody's stuff as if it was mine and try to fix it for them. And
Yeah.
this was an all unconscious dance that was running my show for the first probably half of my life, until I really sat with it and just felt into it and got to see it. I was like, oh my God, this is crazy making. And once you, because it's not your responsibility, but we don't know. It's like the enmeshment of energies. There's not a firm, decisive place where you end and something else begins. It kind of enmeshes together. So a lot of times in real life now, not just in the utero, a lot of people have problems with their boundaries being enmeshed, because I will put the fact that they were highly sensitive and energetic and feeling things at a very young age. They took on things that were not even theirs, but they made them theirs by trying to heal it for the people involved. That's the unconscious dance that happens.
Yeah.
So, a little extra story with the whole ancestral thing. In my family of origin, my mom, many of us go through our stuff, our mother-daughter issues, father-daughter issues, blah, blah, blah. By the time I was 30, I really didn't know my mom at all. I felt like once before she married my father, her life didn't exist, but she was 23 when she got married. So there was all 23 years. So I pretty much told her, I said, look, I don't even know who you are. I don't know what your childhood was like. I don't know nothing. And part of our healing process, she ended up writing me an 8-page letter that kind of went through everything. And it's kind of interesting because it was for my eyes only, because I wanted to share it with my siblings, and poof, it disappeared until 20 years later when she passed away, and poof, it reappeared,
Wow.
because there was something in that that was very helpful for me to assist my father, who my mom passed away before he did,
Mm.
to help him transition through. And what she said was, in her lifetime, at the age of 9, it was her responsibility to take care of her baby brother who was just born at age 9. Okay. In my lifetime, at age 5, I was the oldest of 4. it was my responsibility to make sure my brothers and sisters were taken care of. And I'm thinking to myself, who the hell's going to take care of me? That's how the lineage thing comes. Okay.
Interesting.
So on my dad's side, my mom said, I loved your father. I love your father dearly. He's the best thing that ever happened to me. And no matter how, and his mother, her mother-in-law, had favorites. My dad was one of 9 children. There was 5 boys and 4 girls. And my dad was the favorite. However, anything my father did was never good enough for my grandmother. So I got to hear in my lifetime, being a high achiever, it still wasn't good enough. So do
Yeah.
you see how that kind of went through? Okay, so there's a real beautiful part to this, because at that time my mom had passed. I read that letter. I knew what I needed to say to my father. My father really was on the cusp of needing to get caretakers, and he was trying to make a go of it of his own to, take care of himself. And I was there for a week. And I said to him as he sat at the table, Dad, I'm really proud of you. You're doing an awesome job. He started bawling like a baby because he never heard that in his life, that he was doing a good job.
That's, I mean, so many parallels too, because I really don't know a lot about. It's very difficult to get things out of my mom,
Yeah.
and I think what you talked about this, my heritage and lineage. My grandparents were part of the Holocaust, and
Hmm.
we've all have genetically or epigenetically passed on some of
Yeah.
these genes that were full of stress and
Yes,
anxiety
absolutely.
and especially what's going on in the world right now that manifests itself in a lot of different people in fear. I've been wondering if you have those. You talked about these trapped emotions stored somewhere. That could be from the lineage, ancestral lineage that you talk about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
What do you do to release those trapped emotions?
So a lot of times what I'll do is I like to work with people individually and just kind of dial in to see what's going on, because I have a whole big bag of tools that I could pull from, and whatever I feel is probably in alignment best to help. Sometimes it might be just going on a little hypnotheric journey to a different time and place, to go back to look at what was going on and to realize where you were and where those thoughts were coming from. Sometimes it's just feeling into, if you're having pains in your body, tapping into that and having a dialogue with it, and just to find out what support it needs and where it came from. You'd be surprised. A lot of information will, if you're able to sit with that and even just automatically write on your own. Like, for example, I'm having pain in my hip. Tell me more about this pain in your hip. And it's just like, just allow like the writing to come through,
Mhm.
because sometimes it's like the pen and the hand are going to take over,
Yeah.
and you're going to get some information without filtering it. Just allow whatever's writing and just say, well, tell me more about this, or how can I best support you, or those type of things. And really feeling where it lands, and you get to the point where you have to go deeper and deeper, and then finally you feel like it just landed. You could feel it without a doubt.
What are your thoughts on plant medicine?
That's an interesting thing. I know, microdosing and stuff like that. I personally haven't done that because I don't really resonate with it. But for some people, they do. And that's why there's different things for different people. And that's why there's so many different possibilities. And what I remind people is that go where you're leaning into.
Mhm.
Okay. It's like, if you feel like you're curious about something and you're leaning in that direction, you go and explore that. Because I think that's your intuition guiding you maybe to your next step. I think in order, like for microdosing and stuff, to make sure, if you choose to do that, align with somebody who has some experience with that and is, I would say, an expert.
Mhm.
because it could be a little interesting if you don't have the right support
Yeah.
for whatever's going to happen. Also, I think for some people, it's also helped them with their anxiety. I know people have had really bad, neurological things, and it's assisted them with that. So I believe there's a place for everything, and maybe everything is not for everybody, though.
But do you think that there's being intuitive, if you're fearful of something, some people are
Mhm.
like, well, that's what I'm supposed to do. To overcome my fear. Or is that fear telling you something maybe you should avoid? I'll use an
Okay,
example.
for me,
Yeah.
oh, well, you have an example, please
Well,
share.
I was gonna say quickly, like, when I was a kid, I remember I was so scared of I saw a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and I was walking home, and it was late, it was by myself, and I couldn't sleep. So I ended up getting a Freddy Krueger poster, and I put it on the back of my door. So every single night I would look at it, and I was desensitized. It wasn't scary anymore. But
Mhm.
so that's an example of like going straight at it. Yes, I was fearful, but
Yeah,
doing it
you
anyway.
know, that's like I think there's like a fine line to walk with that, and that's how best I'm going to describe it. When you have a fear about something, and I would I would just, try to get into a place where you're in your body, okay? Because sometimes when you have a fear, you pop out of your body, you're in your head, okay, and you're in react mode. So it's like to get grounded in your body so you could come and trust your intuition and just feel what it feels like from that space. Because maybe it's not the right thing for you to do, and maybe it is. But when you are coming from a grounded point versus a react, when you're grounded, you're more responsive instead of reactive. Okay. And I think sometimes we witness, when we pop from our being in our body into our head, when you're in your head, you're living in the past, worrying about the future. You have a lot of angst, a lot of stress. It's like you're trying to make something happen. You're out of the flow of being connected.
Hmm.
And it's like you're in react mode.
Yeah.
So it's just like you're constantly like in motion. And it's not productive motion. It's the illusion of productive motion. Okay. When you are in your body, you're in your heart space. You're right here, right now. Okay. You're able to relax. When you're relaxing, you're able to be in the present moment. You're able to enjoy. Mindful activity is a great way to get there. Anything that makes you lose sense of all time and place. And we've all had those moments. Sometimes you get stuck in a book or listen to music, hours go by, but that's a mindful activity. Okay. For some people, it's doing an athletic thing. Some people it's reading. Some people it's playing music. Some people it's just being in nature. Whatever works for you to get you to 0 point is the thing that I would suggest you do.
Yeah, I'm so
Okay.
glad you said that it's not only meditation because for
No.
me, going to a
Yeah.
concert or painting or like doing that
Yeah.
hike, it works for
Yeah.
me the same way meditation
For some
does.
people out here in California, they go and surf, and that's their mindful
Yeah, it's flow.
activity.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, so it's about exploring what is that for you, the individual. And
Yeah.
just, try things out. You know, I don't like telling people you need to do this. No, there's a lot of different things. I want you to explore and find out what's right for you, because this is how I'm teaching you how to trust your intuition.
Yeah.
Okay. Because that's what it's really all about. Are you leaning into that? Okay. Then maybe consider that.
Yeah.
I'm
Makes
not going to
sense.
tell you how to do it. That's not my job. I'm teaching you how to do this for yourself so you could, open those doorways and really align with that, because that's your sovereign right. Too
Right.
often we've just given it away,
Yeah, it
you
makes
know?
sense.
Yeah.
All right, so I have some questions that I ask my guests. Some of them music related questions, which will be interesting
Yeah.
to a musician. But do you remember the very first concert that you attended? And if so, what was it?
Oh my God, you know what? I was never a concert person.
You've
I
never
don't think
attended?
I've ever went to a concert.
Well, Dolores, I got to tell you that the next assignment I
It's
feel
for
for
me to
you
go to
is
a
to go to a
concert.
show and connect with live music. A
Yeah,
musician that played music needs to also see other people,
yeah,
playing music
yeah,
and have that exchange of energy. So I
yeah,
can't ask you a next question, which was what the last concert that you attended.
yeah.
So we'll skip that altogether. All right, so let's see how this question goes with music. So for the next year you have to listen to only 5 albums. Now, I'm going to preface,
Mm.
you don't have to know the name of the album or anything like that. Just, if you do, great. If you don't, it's a musician, like somebody, I don't know, Beatles. Like I'm just picking somebody out. So, what would be those 5 albums that you would listen to for next?
Okay, groups AC/DC, number one.
Uh, cool.
I love Genesis.
Mhm.
I love
Hold on. Well, I got to ask the Genesis question. Is it Peter Gabriel Genesis or Phil Collins Genesis crossover?
um
Both.
probably Peter Gabriel. Yeah. Um gosh, let's see. I really like a lot of 80s stuff because it's just like I'm on Pandora, but the Genesis Southern rock I'm really into. So anything like Leonard Skinner and Alabama,
Yeah.
that type of stuff. Yeah.
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 Allman Brothers. Mm,
Allman Brothers, yeah.
okay.
Mm. But AC/DC though, that just like that's
Yeah, I saw AC/DC not that long ago at a thing called Power Trip, and they were fantastic. So,
uh-huh.
uh, okay. Uh, Bonus question I ask: Please describe what your room looked like growing up.
Oh gosh. Huh. Well, okay. The one that I really remember the most is I finally got my own room. So I kind of made it my own. And I had this big canvas on the wall that I actually made this painting. I want to say it was in junior high. And what we ended up doing was getting pieces of plastic and putting colored water in there and then looking at them underneath the microscope and blowing them up and transposing them on the canvas. So I had this big like canvas that was probably 5 feet by 4 feet. And it was all these bubbles underneath the microscope that we painted and stuff. That was so cool. That was on one wall. And then I had it's just like the closet. I could see that. And, I had a little desk there and, just it was just like a little girl's room and that was it. But that was the wild thing on the wall.
The canvas. That's great. Loris, first I want to thank you so much for being on. Where can people find out more about you? Where can people engage with you and your
Oh, sure.
services?
Oh, great. Thanks, Len, for that. They could go to my website. It's drdoloresfazzino.com. And one of my colleagues and I are launching a membership subscription called I'm Awake, Now What? And it's a virtual monthly platform with groups and community that's going to allow people to get some tools, some insight, and some clarity, especially if they're going through some major changes where, a lot of people are waking up from being from the illusion to learning that there's more to life than that, but they just don't know their next steps of what to do. So it's to support that. So that's on drdoloresfazzino.com/, I'm dash awake dash now dash what. So that would be, if they're interested in getting some support, go check that out as well.
I love that. And for my audience, once again, I just want to thank all of you for staying with us and if you made it this far, you probably like what you heard. So if you can leave a, we prefer 5 stars. Or if you want to leave less than that, leave a review, and we can discuss why, what can I do to improve, kind of thing. And if you want to buy the book, Making Cannabis Personal, you can get that on Amazon or wherever you get books. And Dr. Dolores, I want to thank you so much. It's been an enlightening conversation, and really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Len. Appreciate the
Mhm.
opportunity.